Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the How Did I Get Here podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Poley. Lots going on with the show these days. We have a star-studded lineup that we're super pumped about. Some housekeeping notes. Please make sure that you download the latest shows on Spotify and on our YouTube channel, the How Did I Get Here podcast. All of that helps out with our algorithm and makes it super easy for Preston to find us some really cool sponsors. Thank you for all the support, all the messages, and all the well wishes. We're going to keep doing it because we're having a lot of fun with it. So let's get right into it. This week on the podcast, we have Brian Lee and Leina Horii from Kisser in Nashville. Kisser just opened and it already is a huge success. It's kind of a Japanese lunch breakfast spot. The food is amazing. I'm really happy for them, and I'm just really excited to talk to them to hear their story about how everything came to be. Well, you guys have Kisser that you just opened in Nashville, which is super exciting. I'm really pumped for you guys about that, but let's get to that later. So, traditional form of How Did I Get Here podcast is, how did you get here? So, Leina, your family is in the restaurant industry, so you sort of grew up in it.
Yeah, my dad's a sushi chef, and my mom works in the kitchen in the back. So basically, she runs the back, he runs the front in the sushi bar. And I grew up in restaurants.
So as a kid, were you like, I'm going to be in restaurants, or did you try doing what your parents did?
I always wanted to cook, and even when I was a kid, I would cook at home all the time. Like I always trying to take on different recipes, learning how to bake, or and just cooking with my mom a lot. But both my parents just were so against the idea of me being in the restaurant industry. So I went to NYU as a pre-med student, and then graduated knowing that I didn't want to do it. And then just kept working in restaurants at the same time. I was in school the whole time, bartending and just waiting tables, and I just always wanted to stay in restaurants.
Yeah.
And
but
then,
your parents' restaurant's in LA, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Where's it in? Is it still there? Or?
Yeah, it's in Ventura now. They had one in Calabasas, and then now there was a sort of retirement plan was selling that restaurant and opening up by the beach in Ventura. So my dad goes surfing every morning and then goes and works at the sushi bar at night.
Dream, man. God, it's such a California thing. You know? That's why we're closed today. The waves are too good. You know.
Yeah.
So, when you were in New York, were you working in restaurants?
Yeah. I moved there when I was 19, and just got a job serving at a little Italian restaurant, and then just kept sort of bouncing around from serving into bartending, then bar management, and then hotel management.
Yeah. At what point were you like, this is what I want to do?
Oh man.
Or were you just kind of putting yourself through college, just kind of having a job?
It was putting myself through college, but then by the last year of college, when most kids were sort of like trying to figure out what med school they were going to go to, I already knew I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And like I just was enjoying working and at that time bartending so much that's just what I stayed. Like after I graduated, I just kept working in restaurant jobs.
Yeah. What was your first kitchen position then?
Was actually at a restaurant called Red Medicine in Los Angeles with a chef named Jordan Kahn. And I moved to Los Angeles and got a job there as a bartender because I knew I wanted to work in the kitchen there. So it was a full year and a half or so of just bartending and sort of trying to, make friends with the kitchen. And finally they asked me if well, you want to cook? Like, do you want to start staging in the kitchen here? And so I just worked my way up. I was just in the back of the kitchen peeling potatoes and mixing dumpling mix and things like that, like all the grunt jobs until I just worked my way into like actual position in the kitchen.
Yeah. And then how long did you stay there for?
I was there a total of about 3 years, but half of that time was at the bar. And then after that, I moved on to Trois Mec, which is where I met Brian.
Right.
Yeah. Red Medicine closed, and so it was like all these, like in LA, it was known as like there's all these like, okay, there's a handful of really good cooks that are gonna be looking for jobs coming from Red Medicine.
Everyone knew that it was like one of the hardest jobs.
Yeah, I had worked there. I had worked there years before, so I knew it was like, oh yeah, anyone who can work in that restaurant and work in that kitchen is like, let's grab them while we can. Yeah. And so I was at Trois Mec at the time, and we were looking for a cook, and hers was one of the resumes we got, and it was just like, yeah, let's get her in here.
But where did your culinary journey start out at then?
Kind of in high school. I mean, not knowing anything that like what was gonna come of it, but basically in high school, one of my teachers, his in-laws owned a little like beach shack in Huntington Beach, and it was just a little like beach concession. So renting bikes and surfboards and things like that. But it also had it was like a burger shack. You can get nachos and burgers and fries and stuff like that. And my English teacher basically asked at the end of one of the years, was like, hey, does anyone want a summer job? And I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And he was like, okay, well, it's working the counter, taking orders. It's like, I only want to do it if I can cook. It's like, well, usually we hire, we start everyone off as a cashier, and they can work their way into cook. I was like, I don't want to do it if I don't want to talk to people. I just want to cook. Like, I can do that. And he was like, I'll talk to my father-in-law, and got the job, and basically did that all through high school. And I absolutely loved it. I would ride my bike to work every day, like basically ride my bike along the boardwalk, along the beach, show up to work, cook burgers for a few hours, and go home. And it was pretty sweet job.
What do you think you liked about it?
Everything about it. I love at that time, like, it was basically all staffed by other people that I went to school with, and so
right, yeah.
But just like being in the kitchen and like sort of learning that like fast-paced, basically short order cook style of cooking, it was just so much fun. And like just the sort of like shenanigans that you can get into in a restaurant are just a blast. And like being exposed to that when I was 16 years old, it was just fun. Yeah. And I like absolutely loved it immediately. Love the fast-paced nature of it. Like there's just always something to do, always something to just like keep you like physically engaged, and just had a lot of fun.
And where did you go after the Burger Shack?
I went to college, was double majoring in philosophy and physics, and just I thought it would be very different from high school because I didn't care for high school, but it just seemed like more of the same. And so I dropped out and just kind of didn't know what I was going to do. Started working at a Starbucks, and one thing, like, while I was there, is we always got the New York Times delivered to the Starbucks. And so I would read the food section every single week.
What year was it? What year was this?
Oh man, I don't know, let's see, probably 2006, 2007.
Okay.
And so I would read it, read the restaurant reviews, reading, basically like anything interesting about food was just like I was consuming. And there was one article in particular that just like blew my mind and like totally changed my trajectory. I'm pretty sure it was a Mark Bittman article interviewing Ferran Adria and talking about the olive.
Yes.
And then and then there was
that where he was on the cover with the bubbles, the carrot bubbles?
Yeah,
I remember
and
that.
Like, and it was just like, and like there was an online video associated with it of like, showing them making the olive. And I was just like, I mean, growing up in the suburbs, it was just like, I didn't know there was food like this. Like I didn't know food could be this way. And so that made me just get like obsessed with like, there's something actually like intellectually stimulating about food. I'd always loved food and like liked cooking and liked the service industry, but like that's when it was just like, this is something I can do seriously as a career. Yeah. And I was fortunate that there was a really good culinary program at the community college near me. And from there, shortly after that, Charlie Palmer opened up a restaurant in Orange County. Yep. And it was basically
that's not Walnut. Walnut Creek is north. Right?
No,
so he had a restaurant.
He had Oriole in New York at the time, and that was his one Michelin star restaurant. He had
something in Vegas after that.
Yeah,
right? Yep.
Well, he had an Oriole in Vegas.
Yes, yeah.
There's
with the wine,
the wine angels. Yeah, exactly. The wine tower.
That's all I remember from that restaurant.
Oh yeah. And then he had, I can't remember what the name of it was, up in like Napa Valley.
Yeah,
area.
it was in Walnut
Creek.
Yes.
was the chef of that.
Correct.
one.
Yeah.
He had a couple like Charlie Palmer steakhouses and stuff, like one in DC. but basically the one that he was opening in around me, it was like a block away from where I grew up, and it was all like the sous chefs from Oriole that were coming and opening up the restaurant. So it was just like, okay, this is going to be an actual like serious restaurant.
Yeah.
And all I had ever worked at was basically the Burger Shack and Starbucks.
Yeah.
And so I went in and interviewed and got a job as a prep cook there. And that was like getting my foot in the door. And then within the first few months, it was just like, this is awesome. Dropped out of culinary school because it was like, well, I'm getting paid and learning way more here. Why would I keep doing this? And then that just opened up tons of opportunities because shortly after that, one of the sous chefs there went up and was opening, was part of the opening crew at the Bazaar in LA. And he basically said, if you ever want a job, if you ever want to move up to LA, like you've got a job here. And I basically told him, like, I'll be there in 6 months.
Yeah. Right.
So I went up and started working at the Bazaar, which was just this like, I mean,
center.
Yeah, I mean, like it, you know, Jose Andres restaurant, his first one outside of DC, and you know, it's like that like spherical olive that was like the thing that like triggered me and like got me into it. Where it was just like, whoa, holy shit, I'm making it.
Yeah. I've had a couple
of
of aha moments like that in my career. Of early on, I remember when the Gotham Bar and Grill cookbook came out. This had to be like 96, 97, 98. I don't know. It was one of those things. I opened it up and I was like, the salads were like these huge, like held up by endive things, and there was a piece of lobster, and it was like, I didn't know food could do this. And another, you know, fast forward a couple of years after that, when the French Laundry cookbook came out, it was like, okay, duh. Like, wow. It was like the pieces of the puzzle that I had slowly been putting together, of like working at country clubs and like setting up a station, making it clean and neat, making sure everything was like put away properly. The pieces of the puzzle was like that finesse and refinement. You know, Leina, what did you have any moments like that of in your career where you're like, oh, duh, like here it is, the light bulb goes off, and whether you see something or work for somebody says something to you?
Well, the first thought, like when you guys were talking about like your aha moments, immediately to me it was reading Ludo Lefebvre's cookbook Crave, which, you know, I don't even know what year that book came out, but my boyfriend at the time, he was a chef and he had it on the table, and like I'd read plenty of cookbooks growing up, but like never one like that was like that. Like everything in that book was so visceral. Yeah. Like, and I mean, there's that one picture of Ludo coming out of the water holding them.
So it's like very LA.
I mean, now I was laughing at it, but at the time, like looking through it and like, wow, like this is beautiful. And that was like the first like cookbook I ever read that like really impacted me. And then to find myself like 10 years down the line working for him was just crazy.
Right. Yeah.
And incidentally, also like the same restaurant where I met Brian. So.
Yeah, I saw the French Laundry cookbook, and 5 years later, I applied for the position, and I got like an interview, and I was like, "Is this fucking happening?" Yeah. And then I was like, in the place of the pictures in the book. It was you know, like that, you know, that video from the 80s. What is the video where he's a cartoon and he punches his way? Take on me. Yeah, it was like almost like that. I was like inside the book and standing there and like picking fava beans. What other things kind of impacted you early on? Okay, none.
Yeah,
no, that was it. Yeah. So you met at Tuamek.
We met at Tuamek. Yeah. Like
you did some other things before that, though, right? You were in Carolina or Nashville.
Yeah. So after the Bazaar, I was at Bazaar for about 2.5 years, and basically like worked through the stations. I was mostly working in Sam, which was like the tasting menu restaurant, like their version of like mini bar that they'd put in LA.
Who was the chef there?
I mean, so Ruben Garcia, who was like one of the original guys at Mini Bar, like.
He's still the creative director, I think.
Or no, I think he left a couple of years ago.
Okay.
But so he would fly out every once in a while and like, you know, start tweaking the menu and do this and that. And then eventually, like when El Bulli closed, Aitor came out and basically became their like West Coast guy, and Ruben was taking over like DC and East Coast stuff. So I got to work with both of them, and like especially Aitor toward the end, before they turned Sam into Somni. And like so I was doing that, and then it was eventually just like, okay, work through this restaurant.
How many olives can you make, you know?
Yeah, it was an incredible restaurant to work in. Like, it's a 200-seat restaurant on a Friday, Saturday night. There were 30 cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Like,
it took over the whole, like, almost lobby. Like, I remember walking in there one time, and I didn't know where, like, the hotel ended and the restaurant began. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh, I'm standing in the middle of the dining room.
No, you know? it was massive. Like, it was an incredible learning experience. Yeah, it really was. Yeah. But I guess like toward the end of my time there, Red Medicine had opened up down the street, and just like, I mean, we got paid well at the Bazaar in a hotel.
In a hotel,
at
LA.
Was
LA.
it union?
Was
not
it
union,
no? Okay.
But they basically competed with the union job. So like, it was making good money, and so like we'd go out every night. Yeah. And Red Medicine opened. They were open till 2 o'clock.
They were open late.
Every single day.
Yeah.
Every day they were open till 2. You could walk in there at 1:55 and order stuff off of the late night menu, like get food and all that.
And it wasn't like burgers and chicken fingers, right? It was like
still
you're eating a sculpture.
Jordan Kahn's food. And so like we would go there after work, and just got to know like the general manager there and some of the bartenders and stuff. And one day I eventually went and ate like the full dinner. And I only have the bar food, but then like eating the full dinner, I was just like, whoa, this food is mind blowing. Nobody's doing anything like this basically in the country, let alone in LA, and like in this like cool casual environment. So I started staging there in the mornings just to see something different. Like, being in the hotel was like, you work 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, period. So I was like, all right, cool. I've got my mornings to kill. So I'd go there in the mornings for a few hours and just prep and see some stuff and go to work. And then after a few weeks of doing that, they were like, hey, one of our cooks is leaving. If you want the job, it's yours. I was like, all right, cool. So I started working there, and eventually went to pastry, which was like Jordan offered me the job as like a pastry cook. And I was just like, yeah, this is one of the best pastry chefs in the country.
Yeah, definitely.
And he's just like, teach you everything you need to know. So I was like, all right, yeah, absolutely, I'll do this. Did that for a bit, and then just kind of wanted to leave LA. And one of my friends, Morgan,
yeah.
So I was working I was working with Morgan's now wife, Trisha, yeah, at Red Medicine. And
I forgot. Yeah, I worked with her at Bray.
Yeah,
I forgot that connection. That's right. Me rehashing it. It's like, oh yeah, like I'm in the middle
Trisha,
of nowhere, Australia.
And so yeah, like I'd become really good friends with Trisha, and Morgan would come out and visit every once in a while. He was working at Husk, and it was just like, I want to leave LA, and it was just like, Morgan's like, just come out here, you can crash with me, and like, just get your resume over to us. And I was like, all right, cool. So I bought a one-way ticket to Charleston. Didn't have enough money to return. So it was just like, I'll figure it out. Got the job at Husk. And yeah, loved it there. When Morgan got the opportunity to, as CDC up here, I was just like, I'll go with you. Charleston was just like, pretty place. Didn't want to stay there. Nashville, had never been here. I was just like, yeah, let's check it out. Why not? And yeah, so worked at Husk here for about a year and a half. Moved back to LA for a little bit. Got the job at Tuamek. One of my good friends was the CDC there at the time, and it was just like, hey, we need a sous chef. So I went and did that, and then shortly after, we hired Leina.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, when did you come on board then? So where were you before Tuamek? What were you doing?
Go ahead.
I
was at Red Medicine.
She was at Red Medicine.
So it was crazy.
Right.
Like, Brian was on sort of like the opening early team at Red
because
Medicine.
Red Medicine wasn't around that long.
It's like five.
Yeah, was it 5 years? Yeah,
I think.
Then he was there in the beginning, and then I was part of the closing team. So it's like we missed each other at various points in our lives.
But knew a lot of the same.
But you had a lot. The circle was tight.
Exactly.
Right? Yes. Yeah.
So after Red Medicine closed, the last day was Halloween. It was our last service. And then right after that, I started working at Petit Trois, which is a little sister restaurant right next door to Tuamek.
What do you think has better food?
Oh.
They're completely different, though.
They're completely different.
Yeah.
I I think Petit Trois is as close as you're going to get to a Parisian bistro.
I was just going to say that.
Incredible.
I remember the burger being like ridiculously good.
The burger's ridiculous. Yeah. The omelet.
The omelet also.
Perfect.
Yeah. So what station were you working there?
I just worked prep there because I was temporary. They were basically, I hate to say it, they're getting ready to fire somebody at Trois Mec, and so wanted to have someone ready to go. Mm-hmm. And so I was just sort of a placeholder. So it was sort of funny. Like I basically made escargot butter and stuffed hundreds of escargot every morning. Like I made the gougères in the morning. Like just did like little fun. Like I would just be left to my own devices.
Mm-hmm, right.
So I'd come in around, I think it was 5 o'clock in the morning, and then just sort of like, here's some stuff to keep you busy. And I did that for a couple months until.
Did you know that was a holding position for you, or?
Yes, but I didn't know who they were replacing.
Okay, mm-hmm. Right.
So because by the time I was finishing up, was when the Trois Mec crew would come in. So I really didn't have any contact with anybody. Mm-hmm. The first time I even saw Brian he was unloading things from the farmer's market, and I was just in Trois Mec because since the restaurant was closed at that time, I would prep in there by myself. And so I was just like quietly stuffing escargot shells, and then Brian came in with.
And you're like, ooh, hubba, shirt off, listening and
sweating. Yeah. I mean, because like at Trois Mec, we got like it was one of the really cool things about that restaurant, but also one of the really hard things about that restaurant was, if you've ever been to LA, the traffic there is an absolute nightmare. So, but we would get all of our. They have the best farmers market I've ever seen.
It's ridiculous.
There's
no other. I've been all around the world, and there's no other place like that. Santa Monica.
The Santa Monica market. So we would go every Wednesday and Saturday and get 99% of the produce for the for both restaurants, both Trois Mec and Petit Trois. And as one of my jobs as like the sous chef / CDC was, you go to the market every morning, like on those Wednesdays and Saturdays, and get there at 8 o'clock and get everything that you can and bring it back. Well, it's 10 miles away, but it would take an hour and a half to get there ridiculous. And another hour to drive back. And so it was just like, well, there's my Saturday, and Wednesday. It was tough, but it was really cool to like be working so closely with the farmers like that, and like in constant communication with them, and just seeing really like the dynamics of like the seasons and like how we would respond to it in the restaurant
and what's coming in and coming out. Right?
It was just a really awesome experience.
Yeah.
Having said that, we would rent a U-Haul truck like because of how much stuff we were
no
getting.
Way.
And and so it was like me coming in with just like cases and cases and cases of stuff from the market, and Leina's just like, they're just prepping,
quietly prepping
doing her
behind
little
the counter, and I wasn't sure. It's like, should I go out and help him? But he was just so gruff and like didn't even make eye contact with me. So I just figured like, I'll just let him like do his thing. And then after he left, I was just kicking myself for days. I was like, why didn't you help your boss? Like, oh my God, what is wrong with you? Now they're gonna fire you.
But the anxiety level of sitting in traffic, knowing you have this massive prep list, and it's not like, it's a little bit of traffic. It's like hours are ticking away.
Yes.
And I'm like, fuck, well, there goes my day, right?
Yes. Yeah. It was brutal.
I can't believe that you had to like drive a U-Haul every time to do that.
I can't believe you guys didn't buy a refrigerated truck and just park it somewhere.
They did eventually. I can't remember what it was. What it was is when like when Petit opened up, like we originally just had like a Jeep for Trois Mec, and like we would just go, and it was like, okay, just the one restaurant. Petit was a beast though. One, it was open 7 days a week, and it was open from, I think, like noon till midnight every day, just straight through. And it was a 22-seat restaurant, but they would do like 200 covers in there a day. So it was,
oh my God.
It was just like, you're stocking, you have to stock up, and all your produce is coming from the market. So it's on, 2 days a week. So it's just like, you're loading up. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of lettuce and a lot of onions and a lot of shallots and all the citrus and like all that stuff picking up from the farmer's market. Yeah. So
wow.
It was just like, well, we don't have the money for a refrigerated truck. I guess we're just renting a U-Haul every week.
And then when did you first talk to Brian?
Oh, well, she stopped. I mean, when she stopped.
Yeah.
No, but I mean like when
it was a while. Like you were very. He's very. I think the sort of the energy in the kitchen when I first started.
It was a little
at Trois Mec,
weird at first.
It was very like.
I think because like what she was saying was like, we knew that there was someone that was like, it's only a matter of time before we fire this guy,
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very like, for how small that restaurant was, it was very much like there's management, and then there's the cooks. And that's fine in a bigger restaurant, but this is a restaurant of like 10 people on staff total, and it's a 1,000 square feet.
Dictator and everybody
else.
And
it just like it there was this like weird like hostility dynamic, and like me coming from Husk, where it's just like, no, it's raucous, everyone gets along, everyone's going out together all the time, like everyone hangs out. It was like a family of people. Like coming from that to like where it's just like there's management and there's cooks, it's like there's 10 of us, we can't act like we can't be like this. And so it just like it was weird for me knowing that I had to be like management, so I have to be a little more separated from everyone. But I was just like, I'm not doing this, like I can't work in this environment. So I just started hanging out with the cooks after work and stuff, like. And I think that's when we started. It was
a good couple of weeks of like dead silence in the kitchen while people were prepping.
Yeah.
Like everyone was so on edge, just because like someone had gotten fired, and I just kept thinking like, what did I get myself into? But I was so determined to work there because of having wanted this for so long. That I'm glad I hung in there. But there were definitely moments where like I was just examining my life, like what am I doing here? Everyone here is so miserable. But then like eventually finally one of the other cooks invited me over to because they're like, oh, we're having some friends over, you want to come and hang out? And so finally it's like, yes, we're gonna be friends.
I'm in.
And then it was like, oh, Brian's coming too, and it was like, whoa, one of the chefs is coming, and it was. And
then it's just like, oh,
just hanging out, like would go like it eventually just got to the point where like after service we'd all every single person we would all just go to one of the little like bar restaurants right around the corner every day.
What are the things that you took from Red Medicine that translated to Twamek? Because they're very different restaurants.
Super different.
I think at Red Medicine we were all friends. That was definitely it. Like we cared about each other, we got each other's backs, and like it was a kitchen of 4 to 5 people. So that's the environment that like to me like that's what cooking is like the camaraderie. And then moving to Twamek, which originally wasn't that, I just felt like I was missing half of why I wanted to cook.
Yeah.
And then so like that, for me though, that insistence of like we are going to be friends.
This is happening.
Yeah. And then bringing that, and then eventually it did become that where we all like became so close and just buddies, and that definitely was like that, as opposed to like, oh, I'm done with my job, I go home, I don't talk to you. Like,
I mean, that's the thing. Like when Leina stashed with us, like I had already talked to one of my friends that was working at Red Medicine, that I'd worked with years before, and it was just like, oh, like how is she? And he's just like, she's green, but basically what he said is she's very Japanese, which to me in my mind is like, okay, so she's probably like works clean, she's organized, like there's an intensity there, and it's just and all of those things where it's just like. When she came in and did her stage, it's just like, not everything was exactly perfect, or you could see that like
I had zero knife skills.
You could see that she was still very green, but the way that she moved in the kitchen and the way that she even just like organized stuff, and everything was labeled, all this stuff. It's like, oh, you can be as green as you need to be, but you've got the right mentality, and you're coming in like you're coming in working hard, quiet, checking on your work, doing all this, like doing all the things right. So it's like, oh, it's just no problem. We can train her, we can teach her whatever we need to, and she'll be great.
What were some of your first impressions of Brian as a manager?
Oh, I just thought he was an asshole. Like my very first uncommon. Walking in of like he was talking about me, and I was just standing there, and he was talking about me to his chef. Like as if I wasn't even there.
Oh my
and
God,
just like, oh, what? And you were like really busy. I remember Doug was the former CDC, and he was just like, well, you got to give her something to do. And Brian wouldn't even look at me. It was just like, I'm too busy right now. I can't deal with this right now, or something like that. And I was just standing there like, hi. Hey, please hire.
I'm standing right here. I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you. And and that was my first impression, was like, oh, well, he's handsome, so he thinks he can be an asshole.
He's handsome, so he could be an asshole.
That was my very first impression of
How
Brian.
much was Ludo involved in the day-to-day?
Oh man, he was there every day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, I loved working with Ludo.
Yeah.
Ludo is, he could definitely get like a temper about things, but is also one of the biggest like goofballs in the kitchen. Like he was super fun, and but then like when you think about, sometimes I would forget, and then I would think about like what his experience was come in and the restaurants that he worked at. And the
let's just run his resume real fast. So he was at Arpege.
Yeah. I mean, it's like starting when he was 16 because
right.
you know he was in France, so it was just like the apprenticeship and like. I remember he said he was either going to be a mechanic. He did the test and it was like, you can be a mechanic or a chef, and he was just like, oh, I guess I'll be a chef.
Yeah, right.
And yeah, he was at Arpege and did pastry there actually for a long time.
Garnier. Was he at Garnier or Guy Savoy?
I think he was at Garnier.
Yeah.
I think he worked for Marc Monod.
Yes, correct. Yes.
And I think there was one other one, but then he did all of that and then came to the U.S. when he was in his early 20s or like mid 20s or something, and he opened up L'Orangerie.
Yes.
And like at the time, like it was the only 4-star, like in the LA Times, like it was the only 4-star restaurant in.
Was he the opening chef there?
I don't know if
it
he
was an institution by then,
I don't.
Right?
He wasn't the opening chef. He was the opening chef at Bastide.
At Bastide, that's
so
right.
He did L'Orangerie, which was much more traditional, and like the Crave book that Leina was referencing. Like I think that one was based on that, and then he did Bastide.
Yeah,
and that's where he got to be like more creative
and
just like
do
things
I heard
a bit more like
L'Orangerie,
modern
like
and
the level of it.
Yeah.
And
I mean, then he was so young.
Yeah,
and then he sort of like started like the pop-up craze doing
yes.
I think Ludo Bites.
Ludo Bites, yeah.
And I mean, yeah, like he was did that and then just sort of like this and that for a few years, and then paired up with John and Vinny from Animal and opened up Trois Mec. And I mean, again, like the level of just the quality of stuff that we were doing there was incredible. Like some of it would just be so simple, but it's just like that's all it needs to be. Yeah. Like and yeah, just a awesome guy to work.
So how long were you guys there for then?
I was there for about a year.
I was about a year as well.
Similar. And then we actually helped a friend open up a barbecue restaurant, and did that. But by that time we sort of knew that we wanted to get out of LA.
Get out of LA, yeah. What made you want to get out of LA? Traffic?
Partially,
driving U-Haul every day.
Kind of, honestly, a little bit.
Just a change of pace.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was like having been in Nashville already, and then going back to LA is just like
that's a hard Had you been? So when you guys said you want to get out of LA, you obviously were dating at that time, right? Yeah. What was on the table? What were you thinking? Where'd you want to go?
She actually suggested Nashville.
Yeah.
You always you always spoke with such warmth about it. Like, and I couldn't imagine, like, I spent like almost a decade in New York, grew up in LA. Like,
you're not going to go from LA to New York. It's like,
I knew at that point I didn't want, I mean, having been here already and knowing what the quality of life option, like the work-life balance that could be,
backyard
that could exist here. And like, it's just a cool city, and so much is still going on. Like, and like at that time it was just like, no, this is a city that's like, it's growing, there's opportunity, it's hungry for like more stuff and good quality stuff.
I still feel like you could do anything here.
Exactly.
Case in point, you guys opening your spot.
Yeah.
Trevor having a dumpling restaurant turned into whatever it is
now. Like
and
this city embraces those things, and
do.
that's what I love. That's what I really loved about it right off the bat, is just like this city embraces people that are doing something like honest,
genuine,
and good.
Yes,
and
they want to know the people that
are
running the restaurant are there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it reminds me a lot of like where Chicago was in like 2004, 2005. It was, you had a bunch of young chefs that had worked around Chicago, had worked for some good chefs in Chicago, maybe had worked around the country or maybe overseas, but it was young chefs in their like mid-20s, late 20s doing extraordinary stuff.
Yeah.
And the city embraced it. The city embraced sort of the molecular kind of things that were happening.
Yeah.
And the old guard embraced it. These are the younger generation. It was a tight-knit community of people like Carrie Nahabihian, Tony Montalano, Paul Kahn, and those chefs had worked for those people. So it was like, well, this is my people. And,
These are my
the whole
people, yeah.
city sort of embraced this like younger generation, as opposed to like what I kind of saw happening in New York of like these young chefs doing these crazy things. And it was just like smash, like,
And that's
we don't
how it
want
felt
any part of this.
That's kind of
man.
how it felt in LA to some
Oh,
extent.
really?
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just.
What were the restaurants that had dominance in LA then?
I mean,
Providence was. No?
I mean, Providence had been around for years. Like
Yeah.
at the time that we were there.
Spago.
Yeah, I mean those were like the like those are like the old
Yeah,
guards.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
when I first moved there, the Bazaar was the one that was just like, sort of like really like blew up and kind of like blew up the scene. I mean, the number of cooks that I met working there and like where it was just like most of them had come from Spago or Kraft or
right,
or Providence
Yeah.
and I mean, Providence, I feel like has done a good job of like almost reinventing
All the
itself
time, man.
and just
Amazing-
constantly
amazing chef,
pushing
yes.
and
I interviewed at God, what was the chef's name? I think the restaurant was called Sono.
well, yeah. So that was
what
one of
the
the ones.
hell was his name?
David
Myers.
David
Myers. Yeah, I interviewed there in maybe like 2003 or 2004.
And I mean that was the restaurant when I like before
That
the
was the
Bazaar,
it
like that was
restaurant.
the
it
cool restaurant
Yeah,
that was
and a
pushing.
Very
pushing
weird
things.
experience
Yeah.
with that guy, man. I don't know where he is now. I know that it closed.
I think last I heard he like sold everything and is just like surfing in South America
God
or
bless
something
him.
like that.
Yeah. What were some of the restaurants that you saw that had a kind of like a lock on LA or?
I was just thinking like from area to area. Like I feel like we're in West Hollywood where we were. It was just like a Bazaar, Bouchon, and Republique.
Yeah.
Where like
Republique.
yeah, where like places this sort of like powerhouses where just like so many cooks and like servers were
Mhm.
coming through. And then like in downtown area, was it Bestia?
Best,
Best-
yeah.
That was like
yeah,
a big one.
yeah.
And then what was the other one?
There's Church and State down there.
Mhm.
In I mean, yeah, like Santa. That's the like
Yeah.
LA was so like because everything is so far apart and spread
Yeah.
out, it is so pockety where it's just like this area, these are the restaurants, and the cooks
Yeah.
sort of cycle through these
Yeah,
areas, and like
yeah.
and then similar like West Hollywood area, it's like Animal, Son of a Gun, and
Oh, yeah,
or,
definitely
Republique and Trois Mec and like the little Mozza Empire.
The
and-
Mozza was another one. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I didn't until I got to LA. Like I'd always go and visit LA back and forth. When I seriously considered moving there in like 2019, I didn't realize like you live, work, and do everything in your neighborhood.
in your area.
And someone had told me that, and I just thought it was like New York. Like, oh,
No.
I lived in the West Village, but I was still going to Brooklyn, and
It's miserable
I got
to try
there,
to go to other
and
places.
it was beyond miserable.
Yeah.
Like you just, there's no reason to leave. And
Yeah.
I think I had a really hard time. I talked to John from John and Vinny's, and he gave me some great advice. And I had a really hard time of like, well, where do I want to live? I was staying with a friend in Malibu, and it was kind of hard. And then I was really looking at like Culver City area in Santa Monica, and like, well, do I want to live here? And the rents were expensive. And then I knew that I kind of wanted to stay by the beach. If you're living in California, you fucking live by the beach. But then there was all this stuff going on the east side of like Echo Park and
Yeah.
Los Feliz,
Silver Lake. And
Silver
all that,
Lake,
yeah.
and it was like really cool things happening. And then it just got so overwhelming, and I was like, I don't I can't fucking stay. I don't get it, And then I left. So did you, where were you living in LA, and when you decided to leave, like what was like the deciding factor of like everything you just spoke about?
I basically lived the whole time I lived there. I basically lived in like West Hollywood or like the Miracle Mile area, which is by like La Brea Tar Pits and
Yes.
and all that. Which
That's where we lived
is-
together.
Was
yeah.
awesome. Was awesome. Like if I ever went back to LA, I would want to live in that same area. It's central. It's cool. There's tons of good restaurants, and like it's just a cool little environment. Like where I lived in Miracle Mile, there was
Miracle Mile, where's that?
Miracle Mile is where it's basically like
It's in West Hollywood.
yeah, like
Ish.
West Hollywood. It's basically in between Beverly Hills and Koreatown in
Okay.
LA.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's like there's tons
Like
of
Black
museums there.
Mud,
Yeah,
La Brea Tar Pits. It's
Brea
like
Tar Pits,
right on the
Black
street, like
Mud.
right
Okay,
that
I know
area.
that's-
Like
yeah.
Melrose.
Okay, great.
like-
Yeah, okay, great.
And I mean, like the original La Brea Bakery was there, and I mean it's just a great little area. But like there was a I don't even remember what it was called because there's Little Tokyo and there's Little Osaka in LA in different areas of the city. And then there was this one other little tiny area, this little like pocket of Japanese restaurants and like shops right where I lived. And there were like 5 or 6 little Japanese restaurants, and it's got some name, but it was awesome. There was a little izakaya there, an udon shop. There was, and it was just a cool little neighborhood to live in.
Yeah. So you packed up your stuff and you're like, we're heading to Nashville.
Yeah. I mean, one of her best friends lived out here. Like one of her like oldest best friends lived out here, and she's like, she's here. You loved it there. She's like, let's give it a shot.
Yeah.
We, separately flew out here, and she staged with you.
Right.
And
yeah, I remember when you guys came in. Yeah, and I was like, I was like, what is Brian doing? Does he want to work?
That would have been fun. But
yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I sent my resume in for Catbird with Strategic, for Catbird and for Bastion, because I knew Bastion was going to be opening soon. It was like, these would be cool restaurants to work in. And then the HR sort of moved my resume over to, it was like, this might be a person who can run LaSalle. And it's just like,
right.
Okay, so I guess they're not hiring. And then Leina sent her resume in, and it was like, she can stage at Catbird. It was like, I wanted to
what
work
about me?
there. But it obviously all worked out.
Yeah.
I felt so bad for Brian though.
But
what were some of the trials and tribulations that you ran into like the first year you were here of like being in Nashville? And like this was 2016 from what I remember, right?
Yeah, I think
so, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So 2016 to compare what it is now, it's like night and day, you know? And I know some of the things that I can remember, but what are some of the things that you're like that you not so much missed from LA, but you're like, this is definitely a different city?
Brian?
I don't have anything because
No?
I knew what I was coming to as far
right.
as like working, like being back in Nashville, and it was immediately just like, I love it. I guess for me, the thing was making sure she got the best experience out of the city as possible, and like really got to appreciate what I knew I already loved about it. It was definitely rough getting out here. We were staying with some friends for the first few weeks, and on our way to pick up the keys for the house that we were renting, somebody slammed into the back of our car and just absolutely totaled the car. So that
the entire back seat got crushed. Like
when you were here or before you drove?
No, when we were here. We had
just
been
got
here for
here.
like 3 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And total our car, and it was just like, okay, well, we don't have a car now because the person didn't have insurance and like all this crap. I was like, yeah, well, that's Tennessee, I guess.
Yeah.
They were on a suspended license, and it was just a mess.
Welcome to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there were some things where I think Leina was probably feeling like, what have I just moved to?
The thing that I remember the most was I had never seen bugs as big as the bugs here in my entire life, and that includes living in New York and cockroaches.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
it just blew my mind. Like it felt like I was in like a layer of hell. Like because that summer too was the hottest. It was probably one of the hottest summers.
Yeah, it was like late May, early June that we moved here, and it was miserable.
It was like particularly hot and muggy.
Yeah.
And I just remember like slugs and centipedes just crawling all over our porch and like what is this place?
And it's like yesterday I was getting ready to go out, and like on my front porch, I saw like 3 like huge hornets like crawl underneath some sort of piece of wood, and I'm like, it's spring.
And here we
Spring's
go.
here, man.
Here
Hornet
we go.
season's upon us,
Yeah.
man. And that's another thing that I noticed is like the mosquitoes and the hornets. I like
Crazy.
you hardly ever see any bumblebees. And like where I grew up in Chicago, it was like bees were everywhere, bumblebees in the garden. And you're like, this is great. Now it's just like mean hornets.
Yeah.
What the fuck, man? You know?
No, I mean, it was, it's things like that. All of those things sort of getting like piled on to Leina was just like
cicadas, like what?
Yeah.
well, and then the fact, it's like, again, where Catbird is, like that, like Midtown area, it's just like, I told her, just as a warning, this part of Nashville
You're gonna
is
see
the
some
worst
shit.
part of Nashville.
You're gonna see some shit.
The rest of the city is not like this.
Right.
It's really cool here.
Right.
But then I think it was after like a month or two, we had a day off together, and it was again in the middle of summer, and it was just like, we're gonna go outside of the city about 30 minutes and we're gonna go kayaking or
The
canoeing on one of the
waterfall or something.
rivers,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's just like, and like that I think was one of the things where it's just like she's like, okay, I get it.
Yeah, there's a lot to do. You have to like seek it out.
Yeah,
opposed
I mean,
to,
and it was eventually like going to the Ryman and like doing going to some of the shows and like kind of exploring the rest of the city outside of just like work, go home, go home.
It's not so much in your face as like Denver. It's like, I'll just go climb that mountain today. It's like right there. You have to actually like seek out things to do. Like I didn't know that there were like natural waterfalls or like crazy like national parks and things until.
But it's awesome and like they're so close and it's.
Yeah, I agree. So you took the chef job at LaSalle.
Yeah.
Reluctantly.
Yeah.
I thought it was incredible when you were there. It was really great. Strange location. What's there now? There's nothing there now, right? Or
Chef and I.
Oh, is that where that's
Yep.
at? Oh shit.
Yeah, I feel sorry for anyone who takes over that space.
Yeah, it's a tough spot, man. It was a bar called Tippling before that. Tippler, and those were my partners in Chicago. The Tippling brothers were the kind of like consultants on Tavernita, and then they went to New York and opened up the Tippler around the same time. And then I remember them talking about Nashville, and at that time this was like 2012 or 13 maybe, I don't even know. And I was like, Nashville, where the fuck is that? I didn't even know where it was. So that's the little history there.
Yeah, that's another weird one of those weird.
What were some of your goals when you took it over?
To keep
Did
it
you
afloat.
just keep it afloat? Yeah.
I did not know I didn't realize what I was walking into, and it was just like, oh, our labor cost is 40%, our food cost is between 40 and 50%, and it was just like, wait, what?
What's going on?
And we're slower than we need to be, and like having like rent is very expensive. It's like, cool. So I gotta basically figure this out.
Right.
Which working at a busy restaurant is hard. Working at a failing restaurant is unbelievably hard
tough, man,
and exhausting.
Yeah.
Like mentally, physically, just it is so hard. But I learned an insane amount working there and running that restaurant.
It seems like anytime you're involved in something like that, it's like you have to change a lot, but you can't change because this is it's
people
generating
already
revenue
know,
and revenue's coming in
yeah,
for these
yeah.
things, but we need to change everything, but you kind of can't. You're kind of stuck.
Exactly, and it very much felt that way. But I mean, the good thing is the person who one of my Christina Shoemate, who has been a friend of mine for years. Like I worked with her at Husk, and she had actually started as the general manager like less than a month before I got brought on, and so we already had a great working dynamic. And I mean, the cool thing about it was a struggling restaurant, but we got the team to where it was just like everyone was on board, everyone worked together, everyone worked well together, and like we just had this for as hard as it was, we had this really great core of people there, and like that was one of the things that it's just like, for as hard as this is, I love the crew. Like we created, I think, a really good environment. And I mean, have made tons of like people who've been lifelong friends at this point.
Right.
And so that was one of the main things that was like really great about working there. Eventually, it was just like, I don't want to be doing this anymore, and reached out to Josh at Bastion. It was just like, hey, if you guys have a position open, I'd love to come get back into this environment.
The writing was on the wall when it was closing.
Definitely. At that point, it was
just
just like we were just doing what we could to get by, and yeah, I was just like, you know what, I want to go be back in this environment. So yeah, went over to Bastion and was there for 3 years. Baxter was working there at the time, and obviously I'd known Baxter since we were in Charleston together. He was at McCrady's and I was at Husk, and being here, and so it was just cool.
Yeah, we had a great podcast with Baxter.
He's awesome.
I felt like I could just talk to that guy forever.
Absolutely. He's awesome.
So you were at the Catbird Seat with some idiot chef making the most ridiculous
Just a
staff
clown.
meals I've
Just a
ever
real
seen in my
clown, that
life. So I want to kind of pivot into Kisser and what you guys are doing now, but before that, it's like amazing for me to see like Leina just cooking the food that you kind of grew up eating. I think I appreciate that so much more because I don't have a culinary history of my family. There's not like recipes that my mom made, or there's something. We always ate dinner, but it was always like whatever was in the Betty Crocker cookbook, and we ate some sort of dinner. But I always romanticize and like have much appreciation for somebody who was like has a deep, rich history of like your family and like being Japanese, and then you just kind of parlayed that into like these tremendous staff meals. And it wasn't even like you weren't even like cooking. You're just like, oh, this is what we ate for lunch, or this is what my dad served at his restaurant. So what we always said was, Leina, you got to open a restaurant, just serve this shit, So where did the idea for what you're doing now with Kisser, where did that come from?
I mean, partially some of her staff meals.
Yeah.
It had been it had been that way even when she was at Tuamek and it was like
No
super
way.
green and all that, where it's just like, yeah, Leina staff meal day. And it's just like, I mean, that was one of the things that I've always told her and been impressed with, is just like, you are like, just like I think she's a very natural cook, which
tremendous.
you don't
like,
see
guys like us. I had to train to get to where I'm at. Like work hard and like studying. And like Leina just like comes up with hand rolls. Like, oh, I just made this. I'm like, holy fuck.
And like,
it would take me a week to just figure
and all
out
that.
what it is.
It's like I'm like painstakingly trying to. It's like, oh, I don't know. Like, is this right? And like she can just like throw some stuff together.
Tremendous talent.
And it's just like,
talent.
oh my god, this is so good.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, I don't know. We knew we wanted to open a restaurant together, like right off the bat.
We always wanted to open a restaurant. I think it was probably almost 6 or 7 years ago. We originally wanted to come up with a concept of more of a tasting menu, chef's counter, much more heavily izakaya inspired menu, and we wrote a business plan, drew up like the design of the restaurant,
like
and
what
everything.
that might be.
And we originally and then we were trying to shop that around, and we just couldn't get the ball rolling on it. And I remember just being really saddened at that time, and like just losing a lot of like faith in ourselves, of like, oh, we can't get this concept off the ground. And so, but I always like to look at things of like, well, maybe it's the timing. I always believe in sort of like going with the flow of like where your life takes you, and
great.
sort
Well
of like.
said.
And so I thought to myself, like, well, maybe this isn't right for right now. Like, okay, so let's pull back from this. And then, of course, like, in hindsight of, like, how important it was that it didn't get picked up. Because if it was something like that during shutdown, we would have shut down. Like, we wouldn't have been able to reopen for at least another year. Because, like, the whole idea was, like, the chef's counter is super tight, like packing people in, like, and even, like, sort of, like, the rent and what we would have to have paid to have a restaurant like that, we wouldn't have had the funds to reopen.
Yeah, we would have been another one of the restaurants that is like, well, oh, that was open for 6 months and closed.
I don't believe that at all, and I'm gonna disagree with you, because I think you're both extremely smart people, and I think you're both extremely clever, and you would have figured something out. You would have been selling some sort of to-go food, and it would have rose to the fucking occasion, and people would have been like, "Fuck yeah, man!" And you would have figured it out. Like, so I'm gonna call bullshit on that. And you guys would have definitely figured out.
We're just going to agree to disagree.
We agree to disagree. But obviously, until you're put in that position, you don't know.
Fair enough.
Who your landlord is. Like, no, fuck you. You pay me rent. Like, obviously, there's a lot of other things. But I think that you're very smart people, and you'd have figured something out. So, so what was the original idea, and what was the idea that is now? And I ask that because there's a lot of parallels from what I'm doing and things that you just said of like, there's so many times where I started this project and I would just get so completely overwhelmed with, I don't know how to do this. And a friend of mine sat down with me and we wrote the pro forma, the financial model. And we would just sit down, and I would fly to New York sometimes. And he met me, this is when I was living in LA. He flew to LA to do some business, and we'd sit down at Tartine in LA. We sat down at the computer for like 4 hours. We were there. We ate lunch and then we ate dinner again. And we were just on the computer of like, okay, how much do you think you're going to spend in chemicals a week?
Yeah.
What is let's make a schedule. And we just took the pro forma into all these like little sections. And obviously I had no fucking idea what I was doing, but he was a finance guy. So he did it all for me. And then he presented me with okay, here's your financials. And then I had a friend who's a graphic designer. She made a deck for me. So with the financials and the deck, I had something to start shop around.
Yeah.
But I still didn't have the idea. And the idea changed a whole bunch of times. And then when I moved back to Nashville, I was starting to look at spaces, and then I'd get overwhelmed, and I'd say, "Oh fuck, I don't want to do this anymore. It's too hard," or "I don't understand what's going on," or "It's just easier if I just took a job somewhere else." And then I would just wake up a week later and be like, "Let's keep working at it." So, what were some of the ideas that you originally had to what it is now, and how did that change and evolve?
I mean, there were so many things. I mean, one thing is like, we've always just like, we'd get off work and so often just like go home and just talk about ideas, whether it's food or whether it's like what we want to be doing or this or that. So we'd constantly bounce different ideas off of each other. But I mean, one of the things that we knew was we wanted something small where we didn't have to depend on a lot of staff. Like that's always been like one of the main motivating factors. Like we know we can depend on each other. We know we are, we know what we bring to the table, and as little dependence on staffing as possible, because for every reason.
Whatever reason now.
Yeah,
now is like
even more so now.
Man. Yeah,
and so it was just like, well, let's do something as small as we can. And we were looking at different things, and it was like, especially during the pandemic, that we were talking about stuff and seeing some of the other pop-ups around town and stuff, and we just knew. We thought that we didn't know how long things were going to be going on as like shutdowns and this or that, or when people would be comfortable going back to dining and all of that. So we had originally talked about doing it as basically like a to-go heavy like bento box business.
It was much more like, it was very sort of casual, and I always sort of paraphrase it as like Chipotle with Japanese food.
Yeah, like, that was kind of what we were talking about.
And like the whole.
Can I get avocado with soy? Yeah, it's $3 extra.
Yeah.
I know it's extra. I fucking want it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was originally like a very fast casual to go
counter
service,
like
Japanese bento, like heavily influenced by like smoking and smoked and grilling. And the sort of business model that we originally came up with was we wanted to sort of almost like multiple locations, almost like a chain of like something like, I wanted this in like airports, I wanted this like multiple locations in Nashville and then around, and it was sort of, that was where the concept started. And then as luckily for us, the project kept getting delayed, and the longer the project kept getting delayed, how much more we moved away from that.
Started to distill more.
I agree. What is it about this that we want? And then we always kept talking about too, like, well, we'll get this project off the ground, and then when we get more funding, my real dream is to open a Japanese cafe. And then as time went by, we realized, like, well, why don't we just open the Japanese cafe now? Like, why do we have to take this middle route? It was more just because we needed a funding. And that was the original problem of like, well, we can open this super lean, fast casual place with the money that we saved up ourselves.
And it'll make money.
Yeah,
like,
correct,
again, like going to the numbers, like everything was just like, it's like, well, if we do this, how does it affect the numbers? Like, how does it affect like the pro forma?
All we're doing right now,
and it was
man.
just,
holy shit.
And it was constantly playing that game with it and seeing how that exactly, like, how that would affect what.
We have a CFO consultant. He's in New York, and I mean, the guy fucking saved our lives, man. Like, and every day, all we're constantly doing is like calling him. Let's bring the check average of $55 a person. How does that affect labor? Let's bump it up from to $18 an hour to $22 an hour. How does that affect it? Let's put the cooks in the tip pool. Let's take them out of the tip pool. Let's open 5 days a week. What's 6 days a week? What does lunch look like?
Exactly.
And every day we're twisting and turning until, and we're running super conservative numbers. So everything looks really good. But in the back of my mind, it's like, something's going to happen. Like, we're doing one turn now. What if we only do a half turn?
Yeah.
What if this? What if I don't have any cooks? What are we gonna do? Like, and then we have this little market in the front, and it's constant. All these things are just constantly.
I mean, that's the thing, is like what we've always talked about is everything. It's just like, what's the worst case scenario?
Yeah, that's
what's the worst case scenario.
Yes.
I mean, and again, like going back to the cell days, where it's just like, this is worst case scenario. This is worst case scenario.
What an amazing point of reference.
What does it like? How do you run a restaurant that has all of these fixed costs as lean as possible and still be able to pay your employees, and, like, make payroll, do all this, do that, and serve the food that you want to be serving.
Yes.
And so that like worst case scenario has always been our benchmark of like, let's build this around us being as slow as possible.
Yeah.
And what's the slowest
break
possible?
even. Yes.
What's the slowest possible break even? And that's how we're building this concept.
Yeah.
And yeah, like over the last couple of years of like, you know, again, because everything took just so much longer than we ever anticipated and than anyone anticipated, it was like we started doing the pop-ups more out of necessity than anything, and just like, oh, it's a way to get our names out because nobody knows who the hell we are. We've just been cooks around town, and I mean, and just the response. One, the response has been overwhelming, but two, it also is what allowed us to sort of like basically realize that the thing that we'd always talked about being our like dream end goal is that's what people were most responding to already, like in doing the pop-ups. And it's like, we can bypass this whole like fast casual counter service thing and just be what we want to be. And it was just like, well, let's see what the numbers say.
right.
And it's just like, yeah, that'll work. And it's, I mean, we've been open for a month now, and it's been awesome.
You guys are crushing it, man.
It's
good.
been so fun.
Oh.
Yeah. So you're just open for lunch right now? Is there a plan to do dinner? And what is the long-term goal?
Eventually.
We would love to do dinner service, at least Friday and Saturdays. Right now we're just doing walk-ins only at lunchtime. So dinner service, we'll take reservations, a little slower pace. Like that's the dream, because I love dinner service. I miss doing it. Like lunchtimes are nice because then I actually have like a normal life, like where I'm waking up in the mornings, like the rest of the world, and then we're done when the sun goes down, and we have the evenings.
It's kind of nice to
be
have
a
the evenings
person.
off.
It's cool.
Yeah.
But I also
it's weird,
like,
but it's cool.
I miss dinner service. I just love it.
What were some things that you didn't expect about opening a restaurant? I mean, I have a laundry list of
I mean, like, how much more
so
time do we
said,
have?
Yeah,
like,
we said the fixed cost is like, we have a water filtration system, or we did, and it was like $500 a month. And we're like, okay, well, it's gonna have sparkliness and that, and then we didn't think, we're just like, we need a water, and I was like, we started looking at all these, like $500 a month for water.
Yeah,
it's like, why can't we just like hook up a filter
and
system?
then you look at how much,
and then it's
filter.
like $70.
Yeah,
you're like, oh, later, dude.
Did the exact same thing,
right? And then like, what I didn't realize was like how pushy salespeople are. Like, the minute that the article came out that we were doing this, like I don't know how these people got my phone number. They got my address. They got my mom's phone number. Like the guys from Square, like were messaging me every day about using Square. And then like someone else I'm like, dude, do you guys not talk? There's two people messaging me about Square right now.
Different department,
like,
one's payroll, one's this,
yeah.
and
it's like, fuck, man, like leave me alone, It's overwhelming.
It is, and like try to be. Leina's always just like, you're so nice to them, and it's just like, it's like, I try to be nice.
Just ignore it. I'm like, I can't. I feel like I have to
Yeah.
respond.
And it's just like, I don't want to just like blow them off, because one day, I might need these guys or something, and it's just like, oh, I don't want to work with him. He's an asshole.
I don't think they
And
care.
it's just like,
I don't think they care.
You're probably right.
I really don't
and
think
it's definitely
they should.
getting to the point where it's just like, look, I don't have time to deal with you. I'm not going to use your product. I'm happy with what I've got. Bye.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. It's definitely one of the things where it's just like, oh my God, the salespeople. Like, it's like some, trying to, is like, oh, would you be interested in this Italian wine list? No, not at all.
Not at all.
Well, I'll talk to you in a month, and we'll
don't
see
worry
you again.
about it.
It's just like, no.
Yeah, right. Where did the name Kisser come from?
A few different areas. I mean, like, one thing that we've always talked about, again, like going back to like Leina and like the food that she makes and is like very good at making naturally, is like, I always say it's just like punchy flavors and like, that sort of, Leina came up with the idea for like Kisser as was like pow right in the kisser. And then it also, especially as we started shifting in ideas toward like the cafe, kind of like casual cafe type of place, like the idea of like a kissaten.
There's a it's the word kissaten in Japanese is a name of like a very traditional Japanese cafe. Like the concept of a cafe in Japan is very different than cafe in the United States. People think like Starbucks model when you say cafe. In Japan, like the word kissaten, it actually breaks down to ki, which basically means to smoke, and sa, which is like to drink tea, and ten is like a place. So it's like a place where you go, read the newspaper, you drink your tea, smoke a cigarette, and then they usually have like a regional food menu of like just sort of comfort foods and home foods. And that's in Japan, like traditionally what a cafe is. And it's a really nostalgic word because not a lot of kisatens exist anymore because the Western influence is taken over with like the style of what a cafe is. So, but you know, it's a thing where like I remember my grandparents taking me and we would go down to like the neighborhood kissaten and my grandfather would have a cigarette and I'd drink a cream soda, like little things like that. And it just happened that like the name that we've been kicking around already, like it just sounds like a westernized version of kissaten is kisser.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the dishes on the menu that you're most excited about, or are being received well? I mean, the menu's dope.
Well, I think the inari is one of the really, really interesting ones.
It's a lot of times like inari is the traditional like temple food, and my dad made it for me when I was in California. It's just a sort of nothing dish, but it's also something that you don't see a lot. That's also sparks a lot of nostalgia in Japan.
Yeah. So what exactly is it?
It's a fried tofu skin that's stuffed with sushi rice, and you traditionally like a temple. That's like a temple offering that you make to the gods in Shinto shrines, and it's like something that's like your grandparents eat. But my dad made it for me, and I was eating. I was like, oh, this is so good. Like, I wonder if this is something that people would enjoy because you just don't really see it in the United States very much. Or like you might see it like in a Japanese grocery store, but it's not done as nicely.
And not know what it is.
Correct.
Like,
So when I came back to Nashville, I was so excited for Brian to try it. I'm like, tell me, like, is this something that's too weird, or do you like this? And
for me, I was just like, I like it. I don't know what other people are going to, how other people are going to perceive it.
Yeah, but don't you think like, I always say a lot is like, if I like it, there's other people that like it.
Yeah.
And we're professionals and masters of our craft, and it's kind of like people are looking to be told kind of like what to eat, and they're looking for the story and the explanation. I feel like what you just said, if I was dining at the place and I didn't know anything and you told me that story, I'd be like, I fucking definitely want to try that, you know, as opposed to like reading it online somewhere and being like, oh, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah, I don't know about this.
Yeah, like on paper it doesn't sound great.
Right. I'm gonna be honest, on paper it doesn't sound good.
No.
Yeah. So how many seats is it?
We've got 28 seats in there right now, and then we've got the building itself is very unique because it is a shared like common space building. So we've got like a hallway that we will be able to add some seats into, but it'll be around 40 seats total when
it's a pretty good size.
It's a good size, and we've got about 28 seats in there right now. We're doing 80 to 100 covers for lunch, which is pretty awesome.
And there's 9 items, 12 items on the menu.
Probably around 10 12? To 12. Yeah.
So I'm going through this right now of like I think it's just the way of the future of dining is. It's smaller restaurants. We have about I think we have 60 seats, which I think is probably 20 seats more than I wanted, but I think it's better that we got the extra space so we kind of grow into it a little bit. And I think the menu is going to be 13 items.
Yeah.
So when you're going through the process of putting things on the menu, I have way more ideas than slots for the menu. So it's got to be, for me, a very well-designed menu of somebody sitting down and looking at it and being like, I just don't really see anything that I want to eat, And I have a couple favorites, like very classic Italian pasta. The vodka sauce pasta is amazing. The bolognese is really good. The arrabbiata is really great. So those are kind of things that people can see. And then I have, some other kind of crazy pastas, but like the starters of like, we need to have a salad just because it's a great thing to share, I need to have like little things on bread and then a crudo. And then after that, it's kind of like, I have a couple slots left of like, how do I make this menu interesting enough where someone could sit down, that's in the industry and be like, oh, everything looks great. And like my mom can come in and like find things and not say like, the menu's so limited. Like that was a big thing. Like when I was coming up, I was like, oh, it's a limited menu,
It's like trying to find the balance between stuff that is both accessible and like not so esoteric that nobody knows what it is, but to have a few slots.
And not repetitive enough also,
exactly.
Right? Like how many tomato sauce pastas can I have on a menu of 13 items,
Or how many salads can you have?
Or how many things on bread,
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
So, and I guess that's one of the things that us with Kisser, like that was part of the goal for us in what we want the restaurant to be, and like what like place we want it to fulfill is that like for the most part, especially here in Nashville, like when people hear like Japanese food, it's just like it's hibachi or sushi
yes.
or ramen,
and cream cheese rolls.
And there's obviously so much more to it. I mean, it's one of the most fully developed, thought out cuisines in the world. Like it is truly one of the great world cuisines, and just hits every single mark, and like the absolute obsession with everything about food.
Well, every range too. You want to go out and spend $5,000 a person? Here's your places, man. You want to spend $5 a day? Here's your places.
The obsession with the extreme seasonality, textures, like the playing of flavors and bitters and sweets and salty, and like how they cover everything. And within that, it's like, again, there's so much more to it than what people are familiar with, and so it's like we wanted to sort of fulfill that in the like home food, like comfort food area of Japanese cuisine, and it just gives us a lot to play with, I think.
Yeah.
So did you run into a problem of like, well, we can't have 4 noodle dishes?
Well, I don't know, like it's funny, like the way I always think of it is like you're packing a suitcase, and like we have a very small suitcase. You don't want to pack the same outfit over.
Carry on.
Because it's the way I always look at it. It's like you want to have a little bit of everything, but at the same time, like for me, like our suitcase is packed with all things that have sentimental value. Mm-hmm. Like there's nothing on the menu that it's just like, well, we have to have this on the menu because we're a Japanese restaurant. I mean, it's like, no, if it doesn't hold any value to me other than the fact that like it's expected, then I don't care. It doesn't go on the menu. So it's the same way as like packing a suitcase of like, I'm only taking clothes with me that matter to me.
Right. Yeah.
So that's sort of like how I view the menu. As weird as that little analogy is.
Have you guys traveled anywhere lately?
Where did we go?
Let's see.
We went to
New York.
Paris was the last trip we took before shutdown, and then once things started opening up again,
we went to Paris again.
That's true. I forgot about that. Yeah, and then a little layover in New York.
And then we did another New York trip in November. I mean, the thing is, like when we travel for food. It's just like, okay, where do we want to go, and where do we want to eat? Is how we travel. And like when we like in Paris has such a cool like small restaurant scene, and like
man,
the number of Japanese chefs in Paris doing French Japanese food is always one of the things that we absolutely love.
I had a fantastic meal at Maison Soto.
Was
like fuck, man.
Yeah, exactly.
It was out of control, man.
Like AT is like
another
beautiful
one, man.
And I mean it's just there's just all these these incredibly talented chefs that like I think they're doing French food, but they have the like Japanese mentality to it that they apply, and like we've always loved that, and then just even how those restaurants work, and like how tiny they are, and how tiny
Clown Bar's kitchen is like a big bathroom.
That's always we always like reference that of like, look, if Clown Bar can put out food that they're doing using a home refrigerator,
it's like then we can do that too, and that was such a huge motivation for like how we built the restaurant.
Sometimes I wonder if we made it too small, like when the room was full and just looking how packed it was. Like, I hope people don't find it uncomfortable. Like, like I think in America we're used to so much space. Like even just like the amount of space a person is like around them is a lot to take, while like in Japan, or like say in a lot of areas of Europe, like it's understood, just sort of like scoot your chair in a little bit.
I think I just go back and forth. It's like, did I make it too big? Did I get too much equipment? Did I spend too much money on kitchen? Did I spend not enough? Like, do we have everything we need? Like, do I need a deep fryer? Like, fuck, I don't know. I think I put enough little outs that if I did want to add something, so in the gas line we added one extra hookup just in case. I want to add something else along the way. And the hood is just a little bit where we could kind of get it underneath there if I needed another range for some reason,
I mean, and that's what we tried to do for ourselves, and it's just like, okay, there's that, and vertical space. Like that's one of the things that definitely like.
We did really well at Catbird with the vertical space though. It's like me and Lane would be like anywhere, like, dude, we could put a shelf there.
I mean, we're still constantly like
always on ladders.
They're always on ladders. Yeah, they gotta get.
We've got ladders scattered around like the kitchen right now, and so it's like the use of vertical space is it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, because we're a little less than 800 square feet is what our space is.
Jesus, all in.
Everything. Yeah.
Oh, man.
So it's nice. Keeps it tight and organized.
You guys. Well, I think it's going to be a smashing success if it's not just because you're two of my favorite people and you're two extremely talented people. And I ate there. I can't wait to get back. I know Matthew wants to go, and I promised him that I'd go with him, but I was so jazzed on going that I just came anyway. If we want to find you, where do we find you guys at?
What, the address? It's
anywhere. Give us,
I don't know.
social media.
Oh, yeah. I don't
Instagram,
know.
MySpace account.
Instagram.
Kisser Nashville?
Not Kisser.
Not
at Kisser because it's
Not at Kisser.
So I posted something and I was just like, at Kisser. I was like, at Kisser, and Leina sent me this really nice note. Yeah. Thank you. It was so nice seeing you. I'm glad you enjoyed everything. It's Kisser Nashville, and at Kisser, some random dude. And I was like, oh,
yeah, Scott Kisser with 120 followers.
Kisser, if you're out there, we want to buy your handle.
Yeah, basically, yeah. If you're listening,
$1 for every follower you have.
Totally, one free meal a month.
Yeah.
So Kisser Nashville,
Yes.
And then you guys are in the Highland Yards off of Douglas.
Yeah, 747 Douglas Avenue.
Yeah, only open for lunch now, but if you're in the Nashville area, I highly recommend it. Get there early.
Get there early, or at like 2:15.
Get there at 2:15. Yeah. Right on. Well, my friends, it was amazing sitting down with you. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to tell your story, and I'm super pumped for you. So.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for
and
having
likewise,
us.
we can't wait. We can't wait to eat.
Yeah. I'm so looking forward to it.
I'm like shitting my pants and excited at the same time.
I know that feeling all too well.
Like, we built this restaurant. Like, what if nobody comes? Yeah. So, yeah, excellent. Well, thank you again.
No, thank you.
Cheers.